10 times fewer the number versus 1/10 the number. Lately I've been hearing and reading statistics that are communicated in wording that, frankly, confuses me. Forgive me for not citing specific instances, but I can give a hypothetical statistic that exemplifies the kind I'm referring to. Comparing the number of tax returns the IRS audited in 2002 and 2010, the number of unlucky folks who had their returns audited in 2002 was 10 times fewer than the number in 2012. There is something about that wording that bothers me, and I'm not sure why. After a fruitless search on the internet using numerous combinations/permutations of words and phrases such as x times fewer, x times less, mathematical expressions of times fewer as opposed to a fraction fewer, or a fraction less, and more, I came up empty. Perhaps this question is more appropriate on a math website, but in the off chance members of L and U might give their imprimatur to this question, here goes. Here's a second hypothetical example. Is it grammatical, not to mention mathematical, to say the following? There are 10 times fewer pollinating honeybees worldwide today than there were in 1912. Though this is a made-up statistic, there has been a dramatic reduction in the number of honeybees in America of late. Should not the expression be, there are 1/10 fewer honeybees worldwide today than there were in 1912? On the surface, the 10 times fewer locution seems to me to be a contradiction in terms. How can something less be 10 times fewer? I can understand readily how, for example, 2012's bee population of, say, 90 million can be 1/10.1, less than 1912's population of 100 million, but 10 times fewer? I'm confused. Which expression is more correct?
There are 10 times fewer pollinating honeybees worldwide today. Emo is definitely incorrect and meaningless. It implies there is a property called fewness that can be possessed in different amounts. In the same way, 10 times slower, 10 times cheaper, 10 times colder, 10 times closer. There are 1/10 fewer honeybees worldwide than there were in 1912. This is correct, but for a different statistic, 1/10 of the bees have disappeared, leaving 9/10 behind. There are 1/10 as many pollinating honeybees. Is a correct way to express the statistic.
I would disagree with the previous answers and state that 10 times fewer is not wrong but merely idiomatic. Yes, if you dissect the words it doesn't mean what it literally says. Yes, it can potentially be confusing, especially to non-native speakers. No, its meaning is not mathematically precise. All of those things can be said of many idioms. The fact remains that the phrase is in common usage, dating back centuries. Saying 1/10 as many is more technically accurate, and would be preferred if you were writing, say, an engineering specification. But in everyday usage, 10 times fewer or 10 times slower will get the job done. This is apparently oft-debated. See Language Log and the Vala Conspiracy for some other slants on the debate.
Times means, to, multiply, Odo and Collins, as in have you learnt your 10 times table? As an example, let's start with 500 items. Then 10 times as many will give us, but, wait a minute, 10 times as many as what? 10 times what? Obviously, and implied, 10 times as many as we started with. So, 10 times as many, as we started with, will give us 5,000 items. 10 times more, than we started with, and read strictly, will give us 5,000 more items plus the original 500, will give us 5,500 items, though no doubt this expression is normally intended to mean the same as 10 times as many. Now, 10 times fewer, or less, than we started with, must mean 10 by 500 equals 5,000 fewer than we started with, so we now have 500 to 5,000 equals minus 4,500 items, so we now have a negative number of items. If, instead of items, we were to refer to as dollars, and use as much instead of as many, and less instead of fewer, then those calculations make perfect sense. You started with $500 credit and finish with $4,500 debit. Yes, when talking about a reduction 10 times is probably intended to mean 1/10, but it doesn't. That is not what the words mean. And, as user 58220 pointed out, 10 times fewer is doubly wrong if it is intended to mean 1/10 as many because, even if you read it as 1/10 instead of 10 times, 1/10 fewer still leaves you with 90% of the starting number. So, in answer to the question, I would say that almost all instances of expressions such as x times are wrong, and, even though the general intent may be clear, they can also be ambiguous, for example 1/10 less or 1/10 as much.
I'll weigh in on this one simply to add information about the reality in biomedical journals. The incidence of thyroid cancer was 10 times lower/less in Group A than in Group B. Is common. It's idiomatic. It's illogical. But that's the way people write it, both native Anglophones and non-natives. I'll paraphrase Colin Fine's comment. Language usage has little to do with logic. Idioms are grammar-proof and are just the way people use the language. Bill Walsh, former editor of The Washington Post, lamented this usage in The Elephants of Style, p. 121. Even worse is times less. 1 time less equals 0, so how can a currency be worth 5 times less than it used to be worth? Multiplication comparisons are not reversible. If the former value is 5 times the current value, the currency is worth 1/5 as much, or 80% less. This is a logical analysis, but writers don't listen to the logic, they imitate the other writers in their field, just as Gustave Le Bon said in The Crowd, 1895. If everybody else does it, it must be the thing to do, so throw away your brain and follow the crowd.
Language has very little to do with logic. If the meaning is clear, and I think it is, here, what else matters? I don't think I'd say 10 times fewer, but I understand what people mean by it, and, I think, why they say it that way. They're used to expressing quantities by multiples 10 times bigger, 10 times as quickly. Would you have the same objection to 10 times slower?
If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing.